Between between 25 and 30% of all the world's grain emanates from Ukraine and Russia. And what's going on with the troubles over there? Grain prices are shooting up.
Yeah, and oil, and natural gas.
Yeah. So countries now, somewhat, case in point, Second World War here in the UK.
Yeah.
Their food security was crap. They were reliant in terms, a lot of their foodstuffs, commodities in terms of food stuff, were reliant on the outside world. So that's why you had those convoys being shipped coming over from the States, and you had the Nazi U-boats, and they were trying to lay siege and starve the UK.
Yeah.
That's why the UK had ration cards up until 1950. 5 years, roughly 4 or 5 years after the end of the Second World War.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is this: if a country wants to look into food security, fundamentally, a lot of these produce will have to be subsidized by them, because it might not be favorable for the farmer to grow corn or to grow cabbages. So the government will have to subsidize those farmers to make it worth their while. What do you say about that?
But now with our subsidies, though, that have been done in the United Kingdom and the US, now you have a sufficient lack of wheat farms because other things have been subsidized. So if the government in the first place never subsidized that, we might have more wheat farms. So now we wouldn't have the reliance on Ukraine and Eastern Europe for the wheats that are necessary, because the free market would now say this summer we are going to plant wheat in all of these fields. But those farmers might not make as much money from that, because farming something that is useless potentially to the government subsidizing is what they're going to do. It makes them more money now because the government is paying on top of it where the people need the wheat. But the government is not paying for the wheat. They continue to pay for things that are unnecessary.
My argument is in principle. I believe the specifics, as you pointed out, can definitely be run better, more efficiently. I agree with you. But what I'm talking about is the principle. My friend here is talking about small government. No.
My name's Tom, by the way. What's
Tom,
your name?
Idris.
Idris.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tom here is talking, if not small government, because he's talking about prisons and crime.
Let's talk about in
So I'm talking about in principle.
So let's say let's not give specific examples. I think you're right that the government. So if they're evaluating, there's this potential for, if we go to war, we might need to ration things, right? That I think that, like, in those extreme cases where the government has to go to war, right? It is in the government's prerogative, right, to manage some kind of security, like a storage or something for that kind of food, right? But that is a tiny drop in the bucket, right? Like that's like, imagine, you fill a vault with grain or whatever, you're secure for a while, right? Like that is a drop in the bucket compared to the whole market, right? That's not an excuse for the government to go like mass, subsidized, say, farmers need to produce this and this and this. The government, especially in a free market, they could probably just pay off the market for the supplies they need, right? And then, do with it what they want. And so, yeah, I think the government does have a small interest in the security aspect, right? But again, that's a drop in the bucket. And if it's done again respecting the principle that markets should be free, I don't see it being a massive implication that the government is securing some kind of food supply in that way. But a much better way to avert the crisis that we have now, with natural gas, it's diversification, right? So I use natural gas because there's so many rules in the world, because I know, we're everyone's an environmentalist nowadays, right? The government has made it really hard to actually get natural gas in places where it's available. So in the UK, there's a giant shale reserve. And nobody really knows that because it's illegal to mine it. Right? It's illegal to extract that. So again, I think if you had property rights actually consistently applied, people would be able to, on their property, not allowed to disturb other people. You have to make sure that it's not going to contaminate. It's not going to, cause earthquakes or wreck buildings or whatever, right?
But who,
You should
sorry,
be
Tom,
able to
who would
extract
enforce that?
The government.
Good point.
Yeah.
Right. To what extent, in the worldview that you are proposing, to what extent will the government have the right to interfere?
I think so. The government has a right to interfere whenever force is being initiated against another, right? So, if I hit you right now, then
That would be the criminal law, though.
yeah.
So, to what extent are you talking about in terms of government interference?
With like gas and stuff like that.
Are we talking about purely trade? Why are you giving me that?
You've got two with you already.
So
Well, I just.
I think
So
I think as long as you're free and there's no force being initiated against
Sorry, who would determine the definition of free?
Well, I think the like to me, like freedom in a political context is just absence of force.
No, freedom in the context of the government and the individuals. Who would determine the definition?
I think it's absence of force, and it's up to the government to.
That's you
decide.
as an individual.
It has to be enshrined in
If
the
I, as an
Constitution.
individual, has an opposite definition, who is going to be the determinant force?
So then you would have to revert back to whatever the Constitution is of the
But the
state.
Constitution itself is what forms the government.
Yeah.
If the Constitution is defining what the word freedom is, then that word has to then be governed.
So.
And who is going to do that?
I think what you're saying is that this idea of freedom is, at the end of the day, subjective, right? Like you could decide it means something else, and I could decide.
No, in the context of the way we are having this conversation, yes, it would be that. But look, on an objective basis, the definition will come first. How it is going to be put into action is going to have to be determined. The question, and it is a very important one, what is going to be the determining factor? The individual or the state?
The individuals, so the individuals make up the state. It's the idea of, if it was followed truly,
Yeah.
it was government by the people and for the people. It is
Yeah.
controlled truly by the people, not in terms of a group of a upper level of elected official. It could be an elected official, but it is by the people.
So you're
for the
talking about
people.
direct democracy.
A direct democracy.
And the closest we have to that is Switzerland.
Constitutional, I would say constitutional.
Constitutional, but direct, meaning like in Switzerland, if they want to, there are referendums on if they should have minarets on mosques, for example. The minutiae of society they vote on. Should we change our visa rules in terms of immigration? The population would vote on that. That's what I mean by direct democracy.
It's not direct democracy in Switzerland, but it's
close.
it's not
Close.
that close. It's not close.
So
It's not.
I'm not like
Sorry.
I'm not
You
a
just have
political
referendums
scholar,
that
but
need
I don't
50%.
that
It's not even a
just
50%.
hearing that I don't like it because
Yeah.
it's
referendum.
like
But I'm right,
I
the
think that
closest
the
we have
rights
is
of the
Switzerland.
individual first and foremost need to be
In the world.
enshrined in the
It's not that different
Constitution.
from
Yeah.
Germany
All
and
of
the
this
UK, they
specific
just have
political
more
issues
referendum.
about like
And
who
they
to
have-
elect
they
as a
have a
governor
stronger
and
local
stuff
Yeah.
can be
They have
done
federalized
democratically.
Yeah.
Right?
Germany has as well.
But again, like understanding
So,
the
okay,
extent of
give me a
individual rights is the primary problem. Right?
Absolutely, I
It's
agree
the-
with you. The issue I've always had, and I've considered this myself. When we talk about individual rights,
That's what direct democracy means.
we need
Right, so yeah.
explicit definitions
Absolutely.
What's
and
important
explicit
is
governance.
Okay.
legislative.
Because without them, I can do what I want. Is that
Without-
what individual rights are?
Yeah, they do.
When you said, look,
saying about direct
you would draw the line where force comes into play.
Referendums.
But that's for your definition, not for mine.
It happens every
Mine includes the use of force.
So I would argue then that you're wrong.
Yeah.
I think
What's us is
we can
objective.
objectively.
You would be
talk about
entitled
it.
to that, but I can equally say you are wrong.
But I think we can come to an objective.
Excellent. And then who is going to govern that?
Brexit and,
The government.
to get the,
Now we are back to the government. So to what extent
for them.
will we allow the government to
So what I meant by direct
interfere.
democracy, the closest that we have,
To the extent that it is morally entitled to,
Yeah, but there's no
based on the idea that individuals have rights.
Excellent, Tom. And whose
I
definition of moral are we going to use?
The objective one. The
And
one,
who is going to
the
determine that?
closest we have is
a rational individual. Anyone who's rational.
Right. We know that every government has policy departments who will do the necessary research to establish exactly what kind of policies they are going to adopt for the countries. Now, in this particular context, when you say individual rights,
I've just zoomed down from what we were reading.
that is translating to me as what the
Examples.
government deems
You
to
know,
be individual rights are and ought to be individual
We have to
rights.
agree on definitions.
That's what I meant.
That's what I said.
Okay,
so
so-
whose definitions are we going to apply?
Like, okay, so this is
That's what I
coming
said.
to a question about
The closest we have today
epistemology,
is Switzerland.
right? So,
Yes.
I mean, how do you define proper concepts, right?
Absolutely.
So, to do that, first you have to have a good metaphysics that says reality exists. Like that's my metaphysics.
It is a given.
It is a given.
Yeah.
That's the axiom you have to base yourself on.
Sounds correct in reference to Switzerland.
Like we as individuals are conscious, right? We're consciously evaluating the real world through our senses, right? Do you agree with that? Or do you think like you're seeing a different reality than I am?
No.
We're in the same reality.
We hope we are in the same reality. Yeah. Yeah.
So, based off of that metaphysics,
Yeah.
I think that we can come to an objective formulation, and by objective I mean like evaluating reality, by evaluating like what we are as human beings. I think there is an objective definition of individual rights that's, I mean, if you know like John Locke and stuff, he talked about, I think it was natural law or natural rights, right?
Yes.
And if you look at the Constitution, they say God-given rights. I don't agree with the God-given part. I think there is this idea that the rights are an inherent part of a human being's nature.
Okay.
So, actually, it's hard to say because we're conceptual. So human beings are very special in the sense that we're conceptual beings. Like we think in terms of concepts.
Yes.
Animals, they might be able to sense things. They can perceive,
Yes.
but they can't really conceptualize. If they could, they would be able to properly communicate with us. They would be on the same level as us, right?
But is there a possibility that that can happen?
I don't think so. But
Okay.
this is
That's
a
a side.
issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. So because we're conceptual, I think every living thing, its first and foremost prerogative is to live.
Yeah.
Like that's its
Survival.
Yes, yeah. And we live through our use of our minds, our concepts, right? If we couldn't form concepts,
To the extent that we can.
yeah. Sure. If we couldn't think rationally as a species, like we don't really have any natural inbuilt tools for surviving other than that. Like we're not especially physically fit. Other animals can easily kill us. We don't, like our senses don't automatically find food for us. That's all through the use of our minds, right?
Yeah.
So, I like if I hinge my belief on that, like we fundamentally survive through the use of our concepts, then I think the idea of individual rights actually comes from that man should. So I'm going from an is now that
Yeah.
we use our reason to ought. So man should be able to use his reason to live, right?
Yeah.
And in a social context between people, and that's where politics comes in. You should not be allowed to inhibit another person's ability to use their mind.
Okay.
And the way that, and that means not using
Sorry,
force.
Tom, when you say one should not inhibit the freedom of the mind, is that what I just understood?
Yeah, I think the only
Okay.
way to do that is
So-
through force, but go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, on a practical level, if I were to say, okay, I'm going to use my mind to potentially overturn the state, would that be my individual right?
Well, it depends how you mean overturn. Like if by a violent revolution, right? Like with guns and you're killing people and that kind of stuff, right? Is that what you mean?
Perhaps.
Okay, sure.
There are other ways, but let's just
Okay,
deal with
yeah.
this one. Yeah.
So,
Robert is here, so whenever you want to tag out.
okay, I'm gonna.
All right, okay, not
let's
a
end this
problem at all.
conversation, though.
But he will be.
Not a problem at
Hold
all.
on, then I have to succinctly finish this then. The question was, so is it using your reason? I think it boils down to is it rational to use force against another human being? And I think it's not, because force is a shortcut to someone's value of their life, right?
Right.
So ultimately, you value your life first and foremost. If
Yeah.
someone is threatening you with a gun, then you're not allowed to use your reason. You're not allowed to use your rational mind, because the ultimate value is your life. Right?
Yeah.
So for that reason, I think force is the only thing that really shortcuts the use to the rational mind.
Yeah.
But I think everything else is permissible. Like, you're not allowed to use force, but you're allowed to trade with other people. You're allowed to convince them. You're allowed to argue. You're allowed to, if you're overturning the state through a means of voluntary participation, like everybody agrees they should overturn the state, go ahead. If you just go in with a gun to parliament, then you're using force against other
And if you just go with an idea wholesale, and the idea itself perhaps also has an element of violence included, would that still be my right?
Well, I mean, you're allowed to promote the idea, but actually acting on it with the use of force, I think that's wrong.
And
I think things have to be voluntary.
if I promoted the idea to want to overturn the government,
it's tough, because at some point,
will the government interfere?
well, at some point it is a threat of force, which is also, I think,
But the threat is not carried out. So as far as my individual rights are concerned, I'm within.
well, a threat of force it's tricky, because you're not committing force yet, but
Exactly.
you're basically making a statement that's saying, I intend to use force.
I'm not even intending to. It seems very clear that the implication may be there.
Okay. So
So it is obvious that the government is going to have something to say.
yeah, in more grounded terms, I think you should be allowed to promote communism, right? And communism necessarily includes that violent revolution at some point, right? But you're not actually allowed to try to act it out, through a violent revolution. Yeah.
Agreed.
But you're allowed to talk about it.
It's an irony, but it's not a contradiction.
All right, I'm
That's
done.
the one.
I'm
Thank
done
you very
talking.
much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, in that case,
So much talking.
Robert Naser, host of Life on
Sunday, you
Earth.
good people,
Thank you.
and welcome to Life on Earth.
Oh, sorry.
I
I don't know who's yeah. I just got. Whose else is this? No, I don't.